When your own father laughs at you in front of everyone, something inside you freezes. Not anger, not shame, just a kind of stillness that remembers. That night I remembered everything. The smell of rosemary turkey, the silver cutlery clinking, and my brother's voice slicing through the warmth. "Still no job," he said, smirking loud enough for the whole table to hear. My dad laughed too full and deep, like he was agreeing with a joke. I didn't laugh. I just smiled, the kind that hurts behind the teeth. The Bennett family Christmas dinner was a production. Every year my mother decorated the house in Connecticut like it was competing for a magazine cover, gold ornaments, a 6-foot tree, the smell of cinnamon candles wafting through the air. This year was no different, except I was the uninvited guest who still showed up. Not uninvited literally, they'd sent the card, but emotionally I knew my place. I was disappointed. Dad sat at the head of the table wearing his favorite red cashmere sweater. My brother Ethan sat beside him, the golden son. Finance manager, perfect wife, expecting his second child. Mom, ever the peacekeeper, smiled too hard and kept refilling everyone's wine glass before they could run out of small talk. And then there was me, Chloe, 27, between jobs, according to family legend. I tried to blend in, cutting into my turkey like it could distract me from the inevitable question. It always came. It always stung. So Chloe Dad started swirling his wine. "Still no job." He said it so casually, like asking about the weather. His tone was playful enough for others to laugh. And they did. Ethan chuckled first. "She's been investing, Dad. Playing with stocks on her phone. You know, the next Warren Buffett." I could hear the word playing echo in my chest. Playing. As if the years I'd spent building algorithms, analyzing markets, and making trades that outperformed major funds were some kind of hobby. Dad leaned back in his chair. "Playing with stocks. Careful, Chloe. That kind of game only ends one way, broke." I looked up, meeting his eyes. "You think so?" He smiled. "I know so. Real success doesn't come from apps and luck. It comes from hard work and stability. Maybe one day you'll understand that." Mom jumped in, her voice too gentle. "Richard, please. It's Christmas." But the damage was done. Laughter rippled around the table. Ethan raised his glass. To stability, he toasted. Everyone laughed again. Everyone but me. The conversation shifted to Ethan's promotion to his new house in Greenwich, to the baby on the way. I stayed silent, smiling when appropriate, nodding when expected. Inside, I was somewhere else entirely. Because while they talked about mortgages and baby showers, I knew something they didn't. I wasn't unemployed. I wasn't broke. I wasn't playing with stocks. I was running a fund they couldn't even imagine, quietly, deliberately, under a different name. Luma Capital. Mine. When I'd started it 4 years earlier, no one believed in me. Not my professors, not my friends, and definitely not my family. Dad told me I was wasting my degree. Ethan laughed when I said I wanted to manage my own money. So I stopped telling them. I built in silence. I learned the market's language, the kind only obsession can teach. And tonight, sitting at that glittering Christmas table, surrounded by people who thought I was failing, I realized something powerful: being underestimated was my greatest weapon. Ethan poured himself another glass of wine. "You know, Dad, maybe Chloe should just come work with me. Get some real-world experience. You could probably start her off in admin or something," Ethan, Mom, warned softly. But Dad chuckled again. "That's not a bad idea," he said. "You'd finally get a paycheck, honey. And some structure." I set down my fork slowly. "Thanks for the advice, Dad. I'll think about it." He smiled, satisfied, as if he'd fixed me. The clock chimed 9. Snow had started to fall outside, soft and thick. I stared at the window, letting the chatter fade. Their words blurred into background noise, the same old symphony of expectation and condescension. Then my phone buzzed. Once, twice, then again. Dad frowned. "Chloe, no phones at the table. I should take this." "No," he said firmly. "Whatever app you're playing with can wait. Family comes first." I glanced at the screen. The name flashing wasn't a friend. It wasn't a boyfriend. It was James Harrington, CEO of Nova Global Investments. He didn't call unless something big was happening. Something career-changing. "It's important," I said quietly. Dad shook his head. "You'll have all the time in the world to chase fantasies after dinner." My phone buzzed again, then stopped. I slipped it into my bag and tried to breathe. A few minutes later, Ethan turned on the living room TV. CNBC was on mute. A breaking banner scrolled across the screen: Luma Capital record-breaking quarter for the mysterious fund manager Under-30. Ethan snorted. "See, some kid out there actually made something of this stock market nonsense." Dad laughed. "Yeah, maybe Chloe should take notes." I smiled faintly. Maybe I should. I excused myself a few minutes later, claiming I needed air. Outside, the cold hit my lungs like clarity. The snow covered everything, every sharp word, every smirk, every reminder that I wasn't enough. I took out my phone. There was a new message from James Harrington. "James Bloomberg just confirmed. The feature goes live in 2 days. Forbes will follow. Are you ready?" I stared at the screen, my breath fogging the air. Ready? I'd been ready for years. I typed back one line. "Me. Let them see." I looked back through the window one last time at my family, laughing, untouched by the truth that was about to shatter their little world. Inside, Dad raised his glass again. I could read his lips through the glass. "To success." I smiled. "To pay back," I whispered to myself. And for the first time that night, the smile felt real. They say words fade, but that's a lie. Some words are stained. The night after that dinner, I didn't wash off the look in their eyes, the pity mixed with superiority. I didn't need to. I needed to remember it. The laughter from that table wasn't a ghost. It was fuel. I used to think time healed humiliation. It doesn't. You heal it by turning the pain into power, the kind they can never laugh at again. By morning, I was back in Manhattan. My apartment felt small compared to their Connecticut mansion, but the view stretched across the skyline like a private promise. The city hummed below, impatient, relentless, alive. I made coffee, black and silent, and opened my laptop. The screens lit up a dozen charts, blooming like constellations across the dark. Numbers steadied me. Numbers never mocked. Luma Capital's dashboard glowed in shades of blue and green, my colors, my world. I scanned through the trades from Asia's overnight session. Our algorithm had executed 173 micro trades, while I slept, each one a precise move in a symphony of logic. Profit up 2.3% overnight. Clean, efficient, beautiful. I ran a finger along the edge of my coffee cup. It was easy to forget that this empire managing billions in silent precision wasn't a fantasy or a hobby. The only person who needed to believe in it was me. My phone buzzed. "James Harrington." "Morning, Chloe." He said, his voice steady and polished. "You saw Bloomberg's draft?" I did. "And it's time. They're going public with the story tomorrow. Luma Capital's youngest fund manager, Forbes, Under-30 Billionaire works." I leaned back. "And you're sure the anonymity clause is clean completely? You'll be revealed as founder and primary shareholder. It's time to stop hiding." I exhaled slowly. "Then let's do it. I've waited 4 years, 2 months, 17 days. "But who's counting?" He chuckled softly. "I'll have PR finalize the release. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow changes everything." After he hung up, I sat there staring at the skyline. The same man who toasted to my non-existent career was about to wake up to a news headline with my name on it attached to a net worth with 9 zeros. I had built an identity that didn't need a face. That anonymity was my shield. But after tomorrow, there will be no hiding. The thought didn't scare me. It thrilled me. The trading floor at Luma was calm, almost reverent. They didn't know the personal story behind the name they worked for. To them, I was just the unseen strategist, the woman who never missed a market turn. By mid-afternoon, the air outside turned metallic. I looked down at the streets below, remembering how small and powerless I'd felt in that Connecticut dining room. Here, surrounded by glass and steel, I felt untouchable. My mother texted, "Dinner was lovely last night." Hope you got home safe. Lovely. I locked my phone and turned back to the charts. The market closed with another record day. I should have felt relieved, but what I felt was heavier anticipation mixed with the finality of a closing door. I turned toward my skyline, and whispered into the cold air, "Let them see. Let's begin." They didn't knock before changing my life. It happened at 6:30 in the morning, a buzz, a ping, and the quiet collapse of anonymity. I woke to the glow of my phone lighting up the bedroom ceiling, one notification after another: Bloomberg, Forbes, CNBC, Reuters. My name was everywhere. Forbes exclusive. Chloe Bennett, founder of Luma Capital, youngest female billionaire, Under-30. I sat up slowly, the air thick with disbelief, though I'd known this day was coming. Still, nothing prepares you for the moment the world finally looks up and recognizes you. The city outside hadn't caught on yet. Manhattan was still half asleep, steam curling from subway grates, early traffic groaning awake. But my phone was in chaos. Hundreds of unread messages, reporters, investors, old college classmates, numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't answer any of them. I just swung my legs off the bed, feeling the cold wood under my feet, and stared at the screen again. My photo professional, poised detached, was plastered across every major outlet. Underneath, a single line glowed, "From family failure to financial prodigy." I laughed once quietly. The headline wrote itself. By 8, my phone hadn't stopped ringing. James Harrington called 3 times before I finally picked up. "Congratulations," he said, his voice sharper than usual. "You broke the internet." "Good morning to you, too. I told you this would happen fast, but even I didn't expect this. You're trending #1 on Twitter, #3 on Bloomberg, and Luma Capital's servers are crashing from investor traffic." "Let them crash," I said. "It's good for business." He laughed softly. "That's my girl. Listen, you've got interview requests from every network. I can manage most of them, but Forbes wants you to live on air tonight." "No," I said, "not yet." "Chloe," I said, "not yet. Let them talk first. Let the story breathe. I'm counting on it." When the call ended, I made coffee and turned on CNBC. My name was already rolling on the ticker. The anchors were practically glowing with excitement. And the mystery founder of Luma Capital is none other than 27-year-old Chloe Bennett, previously unknown to the finance world. Bennett's fund has achieved a 38% annual return since launch, outperforming every major hedge fund in the U.S. The camera cut to a panel of analysts, each speculating about my methods, my background, my meteoric rise. One of them said, "It's fascinating." Her father, Richard Bennett, runs a traditional investment firm in Connecticut. Seems talent runs in the family. I almost spit out my coffee. Runs in the family. The irony hit hard. The same man who once told me I'd never understand real finance was now being name-dropped as the father of the youngest billionaire in the country. Somewhere I imagined him sitting in his perfect leather chair watching his own words crumble. By mid-morning, I was at the office. The moment I stepped in, the trading floor erupted in applause. Dozens of analysts stood up, clapping, cheering, calling my name. "Boss, we had no idea." "Is it true?" "Forbes billionaire list. You're trending everywhere." I raised a hand, smiling. "Back to work, everyone." Markets don't pause for ego. They laughed, but I could see it, the shift. The way they looked at me now. Respect, awe, a little fear. The anonymity was gone. And with it the freedom that came with being invisible. Kayla met me by the glass wall of my office. "You've got 74 interview requests, 3 offers to sell the fund, and 2 speaking invitations from Harvard and Wharton." "Delete the Harvard one," I said. "They didn't want me when I applied." She grinned. "Yes, ma'am." I sat behind my desk, watching the markets scroll across the screen. Everything looked the same. Charts, numbers, prices, yet nothing was. The intercom buzzed. "James on line 2, Kayla said. "Put him through." "You might want to turn on channel 5, James said. I switched it on. My face filled the screen again, Forbes studio background, my headshot behind the anchor. "We've just received exclusive confirmation from Bennett Wealth Group that Chloe Bennett is indeed the daughter of Richard Bennett, longtime Connecticut investor." Sources close to the family say this revelation comes as a surprise to many. The camera cut to a photo me maybe 20 years old at some long-forgotten family barbecue sitting beside my father. He was smiling. I wasn't. Richard's PR team is scrambling, James said. They weren't ready for this. I bet they weren't. Are you okay? I thought about that. I don't know yet. Because this wasn't just exposure, it was confrontation. And confrontation had consequences. By noon, my office was a revolving door of congratulations. Flowers from investors, champagne from Nova Global, a handwritten note from the mayor's office. Each one a symbol of validation, but none of it filled the strange quiet underneath. The truth was, I didn't care about the money or the fame. I cared about the silence that would fall when my father finally saw it. The pause before his pride turned to regret. At 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with a new message. Dad, we need to talk. I stared at the text for a long moment, the letters burning. Then came another, proud of you. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just pride, late and incomplete. I typed back, about what? Then deleted it. I locked the phone and stood walking to the window. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft against the glass. Somewhere in Connecticut, my father was watching my brother too, both trying to reconcile the woman on their TV with the one they mocked across the dinner table. I wondered if they remembered the sound of their own laughter that night. My reflection stared back at me in the glass calm, composed, untouchable. The woman who had built an empire from the very thing they dismissed. I whispered it aloud to no one. Still no job, huh? The city below pulsed with light. And somewhere far away, I knew the dinner table that once felt like a cage had gone very, very quiet. The silence after exposure is the loudest kind. You think when the world finds out your name, there'll be cheering relief celebration. But the truth. It's quiet, eerily quiet, like the calm before a second storm. That morning, after Forbes crowned me the youngest billionaire under 30, my phone didn't stop vibrating. But the one call that mattered, the one voice I had waited years to hear, didn't come until late afternoon. When I finally saw Dad flash across my screen, my stomach tightened. I didn't answer right away. Some debts deserve to sweat a little. When I finally picked up, his voice was too calm, too measured. Chloe. Dad. A pause. Then, so, it's true. I could almost see him sitting in his leather chair, the fire roaring behind him, his cufflinks gleaming like medals of a war he thought he'd already won. It's true, I said simply. Another pause. Forbes, Bloomberg, all of them. Your pictures everywhere. I didn't respond. I didn't know you were involved with, what's it called again? Luma Capital, I corrected. I found it. The silence stretched. He cleared his throat. Well, that's impressive. There it was. Impressive. The word people use when they're too stunned to say sorry. Is that what you called to say? I asked. Chloe. He sighed. I think we got off on the wrong foot last night. You know I didn't mean to embarrass you. It was a joke. Everyone was laughing, I said. It landed. I didn't mean, yes, you did. He went quiet. For a moment, all I could hear was the faint clink of his glass. Probably scotch. His Christmas scotch, the one he only poured when he wanted to feel powerful. I'm proud of you, he said finally. Proud, I repeated. Of what? Of what you've built. Of who you've become. I mean Luma's success. It's extraordinary. I stared out the window of my office at the city glittering under fresh snow. You had no idea what I was building. You never asked. He hesitated. Well, how could we know you never told us? I let out a sharp laugh. Because every time I tried, you told me I was wasting my life. Remember that? His voice softened, practiced like he was negotiating. We just wanted you to have security, stability, playing with stocks. There it is again, I cut in. Playing. He sighed heavily. I didn't mean it that way. Yes, you did. I said again, my tone even. You meant every word. You always have. He was quiet for a long time. Then, in a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he said, "You really made all that money, more than you could imagine." Another pause. "How much?" "Does it matter, I suppose not," he said, though we both knew it did. There was a long silence after that. Then, like he couldn't help himself, he added, "It's just hard to believe. You're so young." "Under 30, I said. Forbes made sure to mention that. He chuckled softly, trying to thaw the ice. "You always were stubborn. Guess it paid off." Guess it did. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, how to pivot this into a story that made sense, how to rewrite history so that his disapproval looked like guidance, his doubt like tough love. "Listen," he said suddenly. "There's a gala next week, Bennett and Price's annual investor dinner. You should come. Let people see what you've accomplished. It'd mean a lot to me." I laughed. "You want me there now?" "Of course," he said quickly. "Your family." "Family," I repeated. "That's a new word coming from you." He didn't respond right away. Things were said in the past. Maybe both of us could have handled it better. "I was 23, I said quietly. "You were supposed to believe in me, not tear me down." He didn't argue. He didn't apologize either. Just said, "Think about the gala. You belong there, Chloe. You've earned it." When the call ended, I sat still for a long moment. The office around me was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums. I looked down at my phone. One call. 4 years too late. Kayla knocked lightly on the door. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I said. "My dad just found out his daughter isn't a disappointment after all." She gave me a sympathetic look. "How's he taking it?" "Like a businessman who just realized he missed the best investment of his life." Kayla smiled faintly. "Want me to cancel your evening meetings?" I shook my head. "No, I need distraction. Get me the Singapore numbers." By the time the office emptied, snow was falling again. I turned off the lights and sat by the window, the city flickering below like 1,000 heartbeat monitors. My laptop pinged a new headline from CNBC Luma Capital's "Founder Shocks Wall Street Family Background Revealed." I clicked it open. There it was again, a photo of me at 21 standing beside my father at some charity dinner, his arm around my shoulder. The caption read, "Richard Bennett, veteran investor, and his daughter Chloe, the newly crowned billionaire founder of Luma Capital." They made it sound like a legacy, like inheritance. But I knew better. What I had built came from silence, not support. The screen blurred for a second, my reflection layered over my father's old smile. I shut the laptop. That night I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about what he said. "You belong there." Maybe I did, but not in the way he imagined. Because next week at that gala under the chandeliers and champagne, I wasn't going to show up as the forgotten daughter or the mock dreamer. I was going to show up as the reckoning. They say success changes people, but that's a lie. It doesn't change you, it changes how everyone else looks at you. The week between my father's reluctant invitation and the gala was a blur of interviews I refused, and investor calls I managed with surgical precision. James had warned me, "Your father's building his redemption narrative." He issued a press release calling you the special guest of honor before you even confirmed. He was reclaiming me as his legacy. Good, I thought. It'll make the ending more satisfying. The night before the event, I sat at my vanity staring at my reflection. The gold dress hanging beside me shimmered, tailored, commanding. I thought of the endless laughter at that Christmas dinner, the humiliation disguised as humor. I wasn't just going to show up to the Waldorf. I was going to shatter the illusion they lived in. The Waldorf ballroom glittered like a cathedral built for vanity. Crystal chandeliers bathed everything in gold, the air thick with perfume, money, and pretense. My father's name. Bennett and Price Annual Gala was printed on banners draped across the marble entrance. I stepped out of the black car heels, clicking against the marble. The cameras outside turned like hunting dogs. Chloe Bennett. Over here. My father had ensured the world was watching the grand reunion he'd orchestrated. Inside, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall, composed unreadable. The girl they used to laugh at was gone. The woman in her place looked untouchable. My father spotted me before I saw him. His smile stretched wide, practiced. "Chloe," he exclaimed, crossing the floor with a confidence that came from ownership. He kissed my cheek for the cameras, his hand gripping my arm just tightly enough to remind me that he still thought control was possible. "You look beautiful," he said. "And successful. I suppose that's the only kind of beauty that matters to you," I replied softly. He chuckled awkwardly, then launched into introductions, investors, board members, socialites. Each handshake was the same, firm, eager, curious. "So this is the genius everyone's talking about," one man said, his cologne thick as arrogance. "The mysterious daughter who conquered Wall Street. She's full of surprises," my father said proudly. "Always has been." I smiled politely, my gaze steady. "Funny I don't remember you saying that last year when I asked for a loan." The man blinked, unsure how to respond. My father's laugh came too quickly. "Ah, she's got that Bennett wit." The crowd chuckled. The game had begun. Across the room, I saw my mother waving. She looked elegant, nervous. When I reached her, she pulled me into a hug that felt rehearsed. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling. "We're so proud of you. Everyone's talking about you. Everyone always was," I said quietly. "Just not for the same reasons." She blinked, then forced a smile. "Let's not ruin tonight. This is a big moment for your father. For my father." "Of course. It always was." I scanned the room. Ethan stood by the bar, laughing with his wife Olivia. When he caught my eye, he raised his glass. "To the prodigal sister," he said with a smirk. I walked over. "Still keeping up with the biblical metaphors, only the ones that fit," he said. "I've got to admit, Chloe, you proved me wrong." "That must have hurt," I said lightly. He laughed, but his eyes didn't. A little. "But hey, family wins, right? Bennett blood." "Sure," I said. "Funny though, I don't remember family being in my portfolio." Olivia shifted uncomfortably. I turned before Ethan could recover. As the night deepened, speeches began. My father took the stage, his confidence radiating through the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced tonight, "we celebrate not only the success of Bennett and Price, but the power of family. Many of you have seen the recent headlines. Our very own Chloe Bennett, my daughter, has achieved extraordinary success with her firm Luma Capital." Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. My father beamed. He wasn't celebrating with me. He was reclaiming me. My success was his redemption story. When the applause died down, he gestured for me to join him. "Come, Chloe. Say a few words." I walked to the stage slowly, each step deliberate. The ballroom hushed. My father handed me the microphone, smiling like he'd just crowned me queen of his empire. "Thank you," I said softly. "It's surreal being here." The crowd leaned in. "My father is right about one thing. This is about family." I turned to him. "The family that teaches you what you're made of. Sometimes by supporting you, and sometimes by doubting you." A ripple moved through the room. My father's smile stiffened. "I built Luma Capital from nothing," I continued, "with no inheritance, no backing, and no one telling me I could. In fact, I was told the opposite." The air tightened. Cameras clicked. My father's color drained. I remember being told that playing with stocks was a waste of time, that I needed a real job. I remember laughter at Christmas dinners, at birthdays. But I also remember the silence when those same people read my name on Forbes this week. The ballroom was frozen. "I guess success runs in the family," I said, my voice even if the family didn't run with me. I handed the microphone back to my father. His hand trembled slightly. I smiled sweetly, for the cameras leaned in, and whispered, "You wanted your legacy, Dad. Congratulations. Now the world knows who really built it." Then I turned, stepped off the stage, and let the applause chase me out of the light. The damage was done. The whispers began almost instantly. As I walked toward the exit, Ethan caught my arm. "What the hell was that?" "The truth," I said. He stared at me, speechless. I smiled. "Don't worry, big brother. You'll get used to it. Everyone does." Outside snow drifted down through the city lights. I stood under it, breathing in the cold. Behind me, the golden ballroom shimmered with all its illusions, and for the first time in years, I felt free. You can't set a fire in a room full of liars and expect them to stay calm when the smoke starts rising. The night after the gala, the city didn't sleep, and neither did I. My speech had become the story. Within hours, clips of it spread online like gasoline meeting flame. Chloe Bennet confronts her father live on stage. The headlines wrote themselves. Every outlet had a version. Some called it powerful. Some called it ruthless. But none of them called it wrong. For the first time, people were hearing my truth, and it wasn't my family telling it. By morning, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. James called first. "You've broken the internet again," he said. "You realize that, right?" I sipped my coffee, staring out the window at the pale dawn over Manhattan. "Good," I said. "It's about time. You humiliated your father in front of every major investor he has." "He humiliated me for 27 years, I said flatly. "We're even." James exhaled. "You're trending across every platform. The public loves you, but the financial press is divided. Some say you're a symbol of female empowerment. Others think you're reckless. I'm not here to please them." He hesitated. "Your father called me." I turned. "He what?" He wanted to know if Luma's success was somehow tied to Bennett and Price, that maybe he could smooth things over publicly. I laughed quietly. Of course he did. He sounded desperate, Chloe. He's losing investors fast. The press is digging into his books. You hitting that stage might have lit the fuse that ends his firm. I didn't answer right away. Outside, the snow had turned to rain, streaking the glass like old tears. "Let it end," I said finally. "He built his empire on arrogance. It's about time it collapses under truth." James paused. "Are you sure that's what you want?" "I'm sure," I said. But even as I said it, the words felt heavier than I expected. By noon, the damage was undeniable. News outlets had switched focus from me to him. Bennett and Price faces investor exodus after gala incident. Anonymous sources reported angry calls, board meetings gone silent. My father's empire was bleeding, and for the first time in my life, I was the cause. I should have felt victorious. But what I felt was something stranger, hollow. My assistant, Kayla, appeared at the door. "You have visitors," she said softly. "Your mother and brother." I froze. "Here," she nodded. "They've been waiting in the lobby for an hour." I considered sending them away. Then with a sigh, I said, "Send them in." Mom came in first. Immaculate as always, pearls around her neck, smile trembling like a flag in the wind. Ethan followed, his expression unreadable. Chloe, Mom began, her voice too careful. "We need to talk." "I figured," I said. She clasped her hands. "What you did at the gala, it was shocking. You humiliated your father in front of everyone." I told the truth. "Some truths don't need to be told that way," she said quickly. I met her eyes. "How else should they be told?" Mom quietly. "In the kitchen while you pour more wine and pretend everything's fine." She flinched. Ethan stepped in. "Chloe, listen, Dad's not perfect, okay? But this is bad. The firm's losing everything. He's a wreck." I raised an eyebrow. "And suddenly that's my fault." "Don't twist this," Ethan snapped. "You wanted revenge and you got it, but at what cost? He's still our father. You've changed too. You think you're the only one who's been underestimated?" I stared at him. "Ethan, the difference between you and me is that you were born with approval. I had to buy mine. Forgiveness doesn't come with press releases." "Then what does it come with?" he demanded. I looked at him. Change. Silence fell between us. Mom sank into the chair opposite my desk, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Chloe," she whispered, "your father's been calling you nonstop. He wants to see you. I have nothing to say to him." "Please," she said. "He's not well." The edge in her voice wavered, real fear this time. I hesitated. "What happened? He hasn't slept. He's drinking again. The board is threatening to remove him. He said he won't step down unless he speaks to you first." I swallowed hard. For a moment, the sharp satisfaction I'd felt all week dissolved into something colder guilt, maybe, or just fatigue. Ethan folded his arms. You wanted to be heard, Chloe. Now he's listening. So go talk to him before this destroys him. I didn't answer. Mom reached across the desk, her hand trembling. Please, he's still your father. The word father echoed in my mind, familiar, heavy, poisoned. After they left, I sat there for a long time staring at the skyline. Every success I'd ever dreamed of was finally mine, but it felt like standing on top of a burning building. By evening, the city lights blurred into rain. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I didn't want to answer, but something told me I should. Hello? It was his voice. Raw, unsteady. Chloe. I closed my eyes. Dad. He exhaled shakily. You win. This isn't a game, I said. Isn't it? He rasped. That's what it's always been for you. Strategy. Moves. Checkmate. You got your revenge. Congratulations. Don't do that, I said quietly. Don't make this about pride. What else is left? He whispered. You took everything else. There was a long silence. I heard the sound of ice clinking in a glass, then his voice again, small this time. You were right. I never listened. And now it's too late. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the silence that followed. It wasn't a victory anymore. It was a consequence. And for the first time since this all began, I wasn't sure which one of us had truly lost. The sound of power dying isn't loud. It's quiet like glass cracking beneath velvet. 2 days after the gala, the headlines shifted again. Not about me this time, but about him. Bennett and Price faces internal collapse. Richard Bennett, under investigation for investor mismanagement. Each article stripped another piece of his reputation away, one paragraph at a time. By noon, I knew it was over. The empire he'd spent 3 decades building was gone, eroded not by scandal, not by fraud, but by the one thing he could never control, truth. And I was the one who'd set it free. I didn't feel triumphant when I read it. I felt nothing. That kind of silence only comes when you get everything you thought you wanted. James called mid-morning. You've seen the news, every word I said staring at the muted TV in my office. His board just forced him to resign. Effective immediately. They've appointed interim leadership while they investigate the firm's accounts. Investors are pulling out by the hour. I closed my laptop. So that's it? That's it, James said softly. Then after a pause, you should go see him. I've seen enough. Chloe, he said, his tone changing, he's not the man from the gala anymore. Whatever pride he had, it's gone. And whether you like it or not, you two share the same blood. You built something he couldn't understand. That doesn't mean you can't end this with grace. Grace, I repeated. He never gave me any. I know, but you're not him. I didn't answer. By late afternoon, I found myself driving toward Connecticut anyway. The highway stretched gray and endless snow falling in slow, patient flakes. My reflection in the window looked strange, too polished for the girl who once left this town, broke and bruised. When I reached my parents' house, the lights were dim. The wreath on the door had started to brown. I knocked once, then again. My mother opened it, eyes red, face pale. Chloe. She breathed like she wasn't sure I was real. Is he here? She nodded slowly. In his office. He hasn't left in 2 days. I stepped inside. The air smelled of stale bourbon and burnt wood. The house felt smaller somehow, like grief had shrunk its walls. As I walked down the hallway, memories flickered in fragments, the sound of his laughter echoing after every insult, the way he'd dismissed me with a single wave of his hand. But when I reached the door of his office, all that anger dissolved into something heavier. The door creaked open. He was sitting behind the desk, shoulders slumped, the once impeccable man, now a silhouette in half-darkness. Papers were scattered everywhere. Reports, statements, old awards. The bottle beside him was nearly empty. He didn't look up when I entered. Come to see the ruins, I swallowed hard. I came to see you. He laughed, dry, bitter. You already saw me. On stage. You made sure of that. That wasn't my plan, I said quietly. No, he said, staring at the wall. But it was your truth. And the truth has teeth. He finally looked at me, then his eyes bloodshot but sharp. You wanted to make me feel small. Congratulations. You did. I met his gaze. I didn't want to make you feel small. I wanted you to see me. I saw you, he said, voice rising. I saw you sitting in this house, wasting potential. I saw you chasing dreams that made no sense. I saw you throw away a life I tried to build for you. You saw what you wanted to see, I said, my voice steady. You never looked past your own reflection long enough to realize I was building something too. He rubbed his face with both hands, the fight draining from him. And now you've built it. You've won. What's left for me? I hesitated. Maybe peace. He gave a weak laugh. There's no peace in losing everything. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You didn't lose everything, Dad. You just lost control. That landed. His eyes softened just a little. You sound like your mother, he murmured. I sound like someone who learned from you what not to become. He nodded slowly, the faintest ghost of a smile on his face. Good. You'll need that. For a long moment we just stood there in silence. Outside, snow fell against the window like quiet applause from the universe itself. I don't hate you, I said finally. Even after everything. I just wanted you to understand that I was never your failure. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something raw and human in his eyes, regret. I understand, he said. Too late, but I do. I took a breath. Then maybe that's enough. He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion written across every line of his face. You're stronger than I ever was. No, I said softly, just quieter. When I left his office, my mother was standing at the end of the hall, tears shining in her eyes. Did he listen? She asked. He heard me, I said. That's a start. She touched my arm. You did what you had to do. I did what he taught me to do, I said. Win. Driving back to the city that night, the snow had stopped. The world looked clean again, almost forgiving. I rolled down the window slightly, breathing in the cold air. The revenge was complete. But it didn't feel like victory anymore. It felt like closing a book that had taken too long to finish, heavy, necessary final. The man who once mocked me had fallen. And all I could think was how strangely quiet it sounded when a dynasty ended. You think revenge will silence the voices in your head? The ones that used to whisper, you're not enough, you'll never make it, they'll never believe you. But when you finally win, when the world finally bows to the proof you built from your own pain, the voices don't disappear. They just change their tone. Now they ask, was it worth it? That question haunted me in the weeks after my father's fall. The world had its story. I'd risen, he'd crumbled, the prodigal daughter had returned in triumph. But beneath the headlines, something inside me felt unfinished. The media wouldn't let it die. Every morning another article appeared, some praising me as the symbol of perseverance, others painting me as ruthless, the billionaire who brought her father down. One read, Family feud on Wall Street. The Bennett's empire burns. They loved the drama. They didn't care about the truth. At Luma Capital, life went on. My team worked with the precision of a well-oiled machine, profits climbing higher than ever. We'd just crossed $9 billion in managed assets, and new investors were flooding in faster than we could onboard them. But success had started to taste different, metallic, hollow, like biting into victory that had already spoiled. Kayla noticed first. You're here every night again, she said one evening, standing in my office doorway. You haven't taken a single day off since the gala. I have work to do, I said, eyes fixed on the monitors. Luma could run itself for a week and still break records, she replied. You built it that way. What are you really working on? I looked up from my screen. Noise management. She frowned. Noise? People talk too much, I said. I want the markets to remember me for my performance, not my bloodline. Kayla hesitated, then said quietly, You can't control every story. I can control the numbers, I said. And numbers never lie, she sighed. Neither do headlines. When she left, I stared at the skyline through the glass wall. She was right, but admitting that felt too much like weakness. Later that night, James called. "You've been quiet lately. I'm working." "I know that tone," he said. "You're not working. You're distracting yourself." "From what?" "From the part where you realize victory and peace aren't the same thing." I didn't respond. "Listen, Chloe," he continued. "I've seen this happen before. You spend years fighting to prove something, and when you win, you don't know who you are without the fight. So you find another battle. You haven't even processed what happened with your father. You went straight from burning bridges to building bigger ones." I forced a laugh. "That's how I survived James." He paused. "Or how you hide. You don't owe him forgiveness, Chloe. But you do owe yourself peace." After he hung up, I sat there staring at my reflection in the dark glass. My own eyes looked unfamiliar, tired, sharper, older. Maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't know how to stop fighting. The following weekend, I found myself driving toward Connecticut anyway. The air was still and cold. My thoughts dragged me back to the look in my father's eyes that last day in his office defeated tired human. For the first time, I realized how long he'd been afraid. Not of failure, but of irrelevance. I thought I'd killed his pride. But maybe I'd only stripped it bare. When I reached the house, the lights were dim. My mother answered the door, this time relief washing over her face. "He's in the study," she whispered. "He'll be glad you came." The last time I walked into that room, it smelled of bourbon and bitterness. Now it smelled like dust and medicine. He was sitting in the same chair, thinner, paler eyes, duller. But when he saw me, something flickered, pride maybe, or disbelief. "Chloe," he said quietly. "Dad." He gestured to the chair across from him. "You didn't have to come." "I wanted to." "That's new," he said with a faint smile. I sat down. "How are you?" He shrugged weakly. "Alive, mostly. They took everything. The firm, the house. Even my name doesn't mean much anymore." I met his gaze. "You still have it, though. Your name. That's more than some people get." He chuckled softly. "You always were the philosopher." Then, after a pause, "You were right, you know, about everything. I didn't listen. I didn't believe in you." I swallowed hard. "That's over now." He shook his head. "No, it's never over. The way I treated you, it's the one thing I can't undo." I looked down at my hands. "I didn't come here for an apology." "Then why did you come?" I hesitated. "Because you taught me to win. And I wanted to tell you, I finally learned what that really means." He tilted his head. "And what's that?" "That winning doesn't mean someone else has to lose." He stared at me for a long time, then nodded slowly. "You're a better person than I ever was." "I'm just older than I used to be," I said. We sat in silence after that 2 generations of pride, finally too tired to fight. When I stood to leave, he reached for my hand. His grip was weak, but his voice was steady. "I never said it before, but I'm proud of you, Chloe. Not for the money, for surviving me." I felt something in my chest loosen like a knot finally giving way. "Goodbye, Dad," I whispered. "Not goodbye," he said softly. "Just peace." And for once I didn't correct him. You can inherit more than money from your parents. You can inherit silence, pride, and the ache to prove them wrong. You can inherit the instinct to destroy before you are destroyed. For years I thought my father's legacy was wealth, but now I understood it was the hunger that built it, the same hunger that burned him alive. The night I left his house for the last time, I realized I'd spent my whole life trying not to become him, and somehow I already had. The city was waiting for me when I returned, sharp lights, colder air, and a dozen meetings stacked on my calendar before sunrise. Luma Capital had become an empire, and empires demand sacrifices. "Congratulations," James said as I stepped into my office. "We just crossed $10 billion in assets under management." I dropped my coat over the chair. "And how many hours of sleep have you had?" 2, he said, grinning faintly. "You same." He studied me for a moment. "You're running faster than ever. I thought things would slow down after Everything. They never do, I said. James leaned against the desk. What are you really chasing now, Chloe? You already proved yourself to him, to everyone. I'm not chasing, I said, eyes fixed on the skyline. I'm building. He frowned. Building what I turned toward him. A future where I don't need to explain myself to anyone again. He exhaled, recognizing that tone, the one he'd heard the night I founded Luma. The one that didn't invite debate. All right, he said softly. Then let's build. That week blurred into one long stretch of sleepless nights and glowing screens. Interviews, investor calls, portfolio reviews. I was expanding Luma's global reach, new offices in London and Singapore, a partnership with a major energy fund, and a sustainability initiative that would turn headlines in our favor. But every time someone called me visionary or revolutionary, I thought of my father's trembling hand, his quiet confession, I'm proud of you. Not for the money. For surviving me. Surviving him wasn't victory. It was an inheritance. One evening, I found myself staring at the wall where I'd hung my first framed article, Broke to Billionaire, the Woman Who Beat Wall Street. The smile in the photo didn't look like me anymore. I'd built everything from scratch, every client, every trade, every sleepless night, but somewhere along the way, I'd learned his rhythm, relentless, lonely, consuming. I poured a drink and called Ethan. He picked up on the third ring. Chloe, I'm not calling for bad news, I said. That's a first. Funny, I said. How's Dad? He's stable. Mom's been taking care of him. He's quieter now. Read a lot? Watch interviews of you on TV. That twisted something inside me. Still judging. No, Ethan said. Just watching. Like he's trying to figure out how he raised someone like you. I didn't know what to say to that. Chloe, Ethan added, I think you should come for Thanksgiving this year. It's been a long time. I laughed quietly. You really think they want me carving turkey at that table again? I think they want peace, he said. And you might too. I stared out the window, the city below shimmering like circuitry. We'll see. When Thanksgiving came, I went. The house felt smaller than I remembered. The once imposing dining room now looked like a museum of ghosts, same chandelier, same china, fewer people. My mother hugged me like she was afraid I'd vanish. My father stood at the end of the table, thinner, slower, but still there. Chloe, he said softly. Dad. For a moment, no one moved. Then he gestured toward the chair beside him. Sit, I did. Dinner began in silence. The old rhythms were gone. No sharp remarks, no jokes at my expense. Just the clinking of forks, the creak of wood, and the low hum of the fire. Halfway through the meal, my father set down his glass. I read about your new expansion, he said. Asia and Europe. Ambitious. It's going well, I replied. He nodded slowly. You remind me of myself, you know. I was afraid you'd say that, I said lightly. He smiled faintly. Don't be. You took the part of me that built something out of nothing and left behind the part that couldn't stop destroying it. I froze. That's not true. He looked at me, eyes sharp again. Isn't it? You haven't rested since the day you started Luma. You've made billions, but you're still chasing something that doesn't exist. You call it progress. I called it purpose. But really, it's fear. Fear of what? Of being ordinary, he said. The words hit harder than I expected. He leaned back. The curse of people like us, Chloe, is that we don't know how to live without a mountain to climb. And when we reach the top, we just build a taller one. I looked at him across the table. The man who once mocked my ambition, now warning me of his own reflection. I'm not you, I said quietly. God. I hope not, he murmured. For the first time in my life, I believed him. After dinner, we stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold. Stars bright against the black sky. You know, he said, when Forbes called you the youngest self-made billionaire, I didn't feel envy. I felt relieved. Relief that you'd finally escaped me, he said. That my voice wasn't the one in your head anymore. I stared at him, my throat tight. It still is sometimes. He gave a small smile. Then promise me something. Don't let my mistakes become your inheritance. I nodded, unable to speak. He looked out over the dark lawn. You were always meant to burn brighter than this house, this family, this name. Just don't burn yourself out. That night when I left, he hugged me for the first time in years. His voice trembled against my shoulder. "You've already changed the world once, Chloe. Now change what's left of yourself." Driving back to the city, I thought about what he said. The inheritance he gave me wasn't money or guilt. It was the understanding that ambition without peace is just another form of captivity. And maybe for the first time in my life, I was ready to be free. Success has a strange way of turning into a mirror. At first you think it reflects your strength, the proof that you made it on your own terms. But if you stare long enough, you start to see everything you sacrificed staring back at you, the nights you didn't sleep, the people you lost, the person you became. After Thanksgiving, I returned to the city with a calm I didn't recognize. For the first time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't chasing. I wasn't running from my father's shadow. But peace, I would soon learn, can be as dangerous as ambition. The markets were wild that winter. A storm of volatility hit the tech sector, and all eyes turned to Luma Capital. The press called it the Bennett Shield, our ability to stay untouched while others bled. They painted me as invincible. I knew better. Invincible is the last thing anyone should ever believe they are. Kayla knocked on my office door one morning. "You're trending again," she said, sliding her tablet across the desk. I glanced at the screen. "Bennett predicts market crash saves investors billions." "Great," I said flatly. "You just prevented half of Wall Street from burning to the ground." "Maybe try smiling. I didn't save them. I protected us." She sighed. "You can't even enjoy being right anymore, can you?" "Being right," I said, leaning back in my chair, "is expensive. People remember the times you win. They never forgive the ones you lose." Her eyes softened. "Then maybe it's time to lose something that doesn't cost you your soul." She left before I could answer. That night, as I reviewed the numbers, my phone buzzed. "James, your forecast went viral," he said when I picked up. "Every fund manager in New York wants your strategy. CNBC called you the Oracle of 28. "Let them talk," I said. He hesitated. "You sound detached." "I'm tired of being a headline." "You're not just a headline, Chloe. You're a movement. But movements have to evolve or they collapse." I looked out at the city skyline, the towers glowing like molten steel. Maybe evolution means disappearing before the applause turns to noise. He was quiet for a beat. "You're not thinking about walking away." "Not forever," I said. "Just long enough to remember what living feels like." "Take it from me," he said softly. "The hardest part of being right is learning when to stop proving it." The next morning, I canceled 3 interviews, rescheduled 5 meetings, and left the office without telling anyone. I walked through Central Park until my phone died, my heels sinking into the damp winter ground. For the first time in years, no one recognized me. No flashing cameras, no questions, no eyes expecting me to perform. Just me and the quiet hum of the city breathing. I ended up at a small cafe near the east side. A man at the next table was reading the Financial Times, and there it was, my face again, splashed across the business section. "Bennett's genius move stabilizes market confidence." I almost laughed. They made it sound like I'd saved the world. I just did my job. As I paid my bill, I heard a voice behind me. "You're her, aren't you?" I turned. A woman stood there, mid-40s, wearing a faded coat and a tired smile. The girl from Forbes. The one who started with nothing. "I'm Chloe," I said cautiously. She nodded. "I knew it. My son talks about you all the time. Says you're proof that people like us can make it." Her eyes shone with something I hadn't seen in a long time, hope. "He started investing last year," she said. "He's only 21, but he believes he can build something. Because of you." I didn't know what to say. "Thank you," she added softly, "for showing him that you don't need permission to change your life." When she left, I sat there for a long time. All this time I'd been chasing revenge, validation, control. And yet what mattered most wasn't the empire I'd built, it was the permission my story had given someone else. Maybe that was what being right was supposed to mean. Not proving others wrong, but proving what's possible. That night back in my penthouse, I wrote a letter to my team. Effective immediately. Luma Capital will transition to employee partnership. Every lead analyst, every strategist, every developer will receive ownership shares equivalent to their contribution since the company's founding. Luma was never meant to be a monument, it was meant to be a movement. I didn't sleep. I just watched the city lights fade into dawn. When morning came, James called. "You're really doing this?" "Yes." "Do you realize you're giving away almost half your company?" "I'm not giving it away," I said. "I'm giving it back." He exhaled. "You know your father would never—" "I know," I interrupted. "That's why I have to." Later that day, I walked into the office. My entire team stood waiting, a mix of confusion and disbelief. I explained everything: the partnership plan, the ownership shares, the future I wanted for them. When I finished, there was silence. Then Kayla stepped forward. "You're serious?" "Completely." She smiled, shaking her head. "You're insane." "Probably," I said, "but it feels like the first sane thing I've done." Applause filled the room. Real applause. Not the polite kind people give to power, but the kind that comes from being seen. As they cheered, I thought about something my father once told me. Power means never owing anyone anything. He was wrong. The only power that lasts is the kind you're willing to share. That evening, standing by the window of my office, watching the sun bleed gold across the skyline, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, not from winning, not from proving, but from letting go. And for the first time, being right didn't feel like a burden. It felt like freedom. The strangest part about transformation is that it rarely announces itself. It doesn't crash through the door or arrive with applause. It creeps in quietly, like the moment before dawn when you realize the darkness is thinning. A few months after giving my team ownership of Luma, the noise that had once defined my life began to fade. No breaking news, no viral headlines, no tense board meetings filled with sharp whispers. For the first time, the world wasn't watching me, and I didn't miss it. What surprised me most was how natural peace could feel once I stopped resisting it. I started walking to work again, no driver, no security detail, just me, the winter wind, and a city that finally seemed to breathe at the same rhythm I did. Every corner of Manhattan held memories of who I used to be, the girl who carried bitterness like armor. But now I passed those ghosts without flinching. One morning, as I stopped at my usual coffee shop, I saw a familiar name on the news ticker mounted above the counter. "Richard Bennett retires from public life." My father. The anchor's voice was calm, almost reverent. After decades in finance, former CEO Richard Bennett has formally stepped away from all corporate holdings. Sources close to the family say he plans to spend his time mentoring young entrepreneurs. I almost smiled. The man who once mocked ambition he didn't understand was now teaching it. Maybe that was redemption, or maybe it was survival. Either way, I didn't resent it. Later that day, an email appeared in my inbox with a subject line that simply read, "Dinner." It was from him. I hesitated before replying. Then I typed, "Sure." Friday at 7. When I arrived at the restaurant, I barely recognized him. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by a sweater and a quiet humility that didn't feel forced. His hair had thinned, but his eyes, those sharp, assessing eyes, were still the same. "Chloe," he said, standing as I approached. "Dad." He gestured toward the seat across from him. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. He smiled faintly. "That's fair." For a few moments we didn't speak. The waiter poured wine, took our orders, and disappeared. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "I wanted to see you face to face. Not about the past, just to thank you." "Thank me?" I asked, arching a brow. "For showing me what leadership looks like when it's not about control," he said. "Your decision to give away half your company, it was extraordinary." "I didn't give it away," I said softly. "I just stopped hoarding what wasn't mine to begin with." He nodded. "That's what I mean. You built something real, Chloe. Something that lasts. You did what I never could." His voice trembled slightly on that last sentence. And for a moment, I saw not the titan who once loomed over me, but a man trying to make peace with his own reflection. "People can change," I said. They can, he agreed. Though it takes most of us too long. We talked for hours about Luma, about my team, about the world he no longer understood but wanted to. He listened more than he spoke, which was new. At one point, he said quietly, "I read an article that called you the conscience of modern finance. Do you believe that?" I laughed softly. Conscience, I don't know. Maybe just someone who got tired of pretending money was the only measure of worth. He looked thoughtful. Maybe that's why you succeeded. You played a game most people never stop to question. After dinner, as we stepped outside, he turned to me. "You know, I used to believe winning meant outlasting everyone else. But you redefined it. How so?" "You turned victory into inclusion," he said. "That's harder than conquest." We stood there for a moment under the restaurant's warm light, the city humming around us. He looked older, smaller but lighter somehow. "Dad," I said softly, "do you regret it, the way things went between us?" He took a deep breath. "Every day. But I'm grateful for the ending." "Why?" "Because I got to see you become everything I never allowed myself to be." Something inside me eased then, like a door finally closing without a slam. That night back in my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window. Below the city glowed a living constellation of ambition and exhaustion. I thought about all the dinners where I'd been the quiet one at the table holding my breath while my family laughed at my dreams. Now the laughter was gone, replaced by silence, not the painful kind, but the peaceful kind that comes after a storm. I checked my phone. Dozens of messages, investors, journalists, former rivals. But one stood out. It was from Rachel, my cousin, the only one who'd ever defended me years ago at that infamous Christmas dinner. Her text was simple. "Proud of you. The whole family reads everything you do. You made them think. That's more powerful than revenge." I smiled. She was right. Revenge gets attention. Reflection changes people. The next morning, I went to the office early. The floors were quiet, the sun barely breaking through the skyline. Kayla was already there, sipping coffee. "You're early," I said. She smirked. "You're later than usual." "Fair." I walked to my desk. "I had dinner with my dad last night." She raised her eyebrows. "And it wasn't about guilt this time," I said. "It was about understanding." "That's new," she said. "It felt new," I admitted. Maybe that's what forgiveness actually is, not forgetting what happened, but being able to sit across from it and breathe. Kayla studied me for a long moment. "You've changed." "So has everything," I said quietly. She smiled. "Good, because the world's watching again." "Let them," I said, glancing toward the sunrise. "This time I'm not performing." When I turned back to my desk, the light caught my reflection in the glass, a face no longer haunted by proving or pleasing, just living. The tables had turned, not with thunder, but with grace. And somehow that silence was the loudest victory of all. Revenge was supposed to be the ending. That's what I believed when this story began, that once I proved them wrong, the ache would fade, the world would make sense, and I could finally rest. But revenge isn't an ending. It's a door you walk through only to find another version of yourself waiting on the other side, asking, "Now what?" Months after reconciling with my father, after the noise had finally died down, I realized that what came next wasn't about wealth or victory. It was about what I would do with the power I'd once fought so hard to claim. Luma Capital was thriving, stronger, freer, more human than I'd ever imagined. The new partnership model had changed everything. My employees no longer worked for me. They built with me. Profits rose, yes, but so did something far more valuable: trust. I'd created the kind of company I'd once dreamed of working for: transparent, ambitious, and fair. On a gray morning in March, I stood in front of a crowd at Columbia University preparing to deliver the keynote address for their entrepreneurship summit. Rows of young faces looked up at me, bright, hungry, full of that same fire I used to carry like a shield. I began. "When I was your age, I thought the goal was to be the smartest person in the room, the loudest, the one everyone noticed. But what I've learned is that real power doesn't come from being noticed, it comes from being useful. It comes from creating something that makes the world a little less cruel than you found it. As I spoke, I saw flashes of my younger self among them, the girl who once sat in rooms full of laughter, pretending their mockery didn't sting. And for the first time, I didn't pity her. I was proud of her. She hadn't survived despite her pain. She'd survived because of it. After the speech, a student approached me, nervous but determined. "Ms. Bennett," she said, "how did you keep going when everyone told you to stop?" I smiled. Because every no sounded like a dare. She grinned, nodding slowly, and I thought, she'll be fine. That night, as I returned to my penthouse overlooking the Hudson, I found a letter waiting on my desk. Handwritten. No one wrote letters anymore. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. My father's. "Chloe," it began. "By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Nothing dramatic, just the quiet kind of leaving that comes when the body knows it's time. I didn't want to make it a spectacle. You've had enough of those. I wanted to tell you one last thing. I'm proud of you, not because you built an empire, but because you built yourself. You were the best thing I ever made, even if I didn't know it until the end." I stopped reading. My throat burned. The city outside my window blurred into streaks of gold and gray. The rest of the letter was simple. He'd left me his journals, notes, reflections, things he never said aloud. He wrote that he'd finally understood that love and pride weren't the same thing, that he'd spent too much of his life confusing control for care. I read those words again and again until dawn. Then I poured myself a cup of coffee, walked out onto the balcony, and watched the sun rise over the river. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger or guilt or the need to prove anything. I just felt whole. A week later at the memorial, people whispered the way they always do at funerals, half sorrow, half gossip. They spoke of his brilliance, his downfall, his redemption. I didn't speak much. I didn't need to. I just stood there watching the man who once towered over my life finally rest beneath the earth. After the service, Ethan found me by the gate. "He wanted you to have this," he said, handing me a small wooden box. Inside was a single gold pen, the same one my father had used to sign every deal of his career. "He said you'd know what to do with it," Ethan added. I turned the pen in my hand, its surface warm from his palm. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I do." 2 months later, the Luma Foundation was born. Its mission: financial literacy and access for women from underserved communities, the ones who'd been told, like I once was, that money wasn't for them, that the world of finance was a man's game. The first scholarship was in his name. When the press asked why, I told them the truth. Because he taught me the hardest lesson I ever learned: sometimes the people who break you are the same ones who make you strong enough to rebuild. The foundation grew faster than I'd imagined. Within a year, we'd reached thousands of women, teaching, mentoring, opening doors. Every time one of them launched a business, landed a job, or made her first investment, I felt that same quiet satisfaction ripple through me. The kind that didn't need applause. One evening after a long day at the foundation, I walked along the river, the city lights flickering like a heartbeat. I thought about everything that had happened: the humiliation, the success, the loss, the peace that came after. And I realized something I'd never understood before. Revenge had never been my story's end. It had been the spark that forced me to find a better beginning. I wasn't the daughter my father wanted. I was the woman I needed to become. When I got home, I placed his pen beside my computer next to the first article Forbes ever wrote about me. The caption read, "The girl with no job who became a billionaire." I smiled. "Not a billionaire," I whispered to the empty room. "Just free." Outside, the city pulsed with a familiar rhythm, fast, relentless, alive. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was running against it. I was moving with it. And as I turned off the lights, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the moment I stopped needing revenge to feel alive. If you've ever been underestimated, remember this. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's living so fully, so fearlessly that they stop being part of the story at all. Like, comment, and share your thoughts below. Because somewhere, someone out there still needs to hear that the tables can turn quietly and the light after revenge can be brighter than you ever imagined.